All right, guys, welcome back to the Sex and Bacon podcast. If you guys have been listening and following, we have taken a little break for a little while and we are starting back up this month. And I'm very excited because I have with me the lovely Ava today. If anybody was listening, even 6 months ago, I did an interview with Ava. We talked all things Tantric. And then I actually did book the opening to pleasure, is what it was called, correct? Sessions with you. So
Yeah.
I've been working with Ava for the last few months, and I have to say it's been definitely a roller coaster, and it's not what you think it would be. When at first I was like, okay, I need to do this. I want to learn all things Tantra and Tantra orgasms. It's like you straight think like it's just going to be all about sex. And like it's kind of more about healing and seeing what comes up and what needs to be healed to be able to move into, I feel like, more of like those things of like pleasure for yourself. So it's been very interesting, but very amazing as well because I've learned so much about myself. I've been able to heal a lot. And so I've been very grateful for like the work that we have been able to do together and for the time that we've spent with you helping me learn these things about myself. And yeah, so thank you for that. And highly recommend to anybody if they want to dive deep into them themselves, pleasure, healing. I would reach out to Ava for that. Absolutely. So that's been great. And today we are going to talk all things orgasms, the different types of orgasms, and kind of, I guess, where that leads, potentially the emotional side that's attached to those orgasms. And yeah, just see what happens. So thank you, Ava, for being here again.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I'm so happy to be back.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm excited to hear it because even when I had mentioned this to Simona and a couple other girls that I do work with, they're like, "I'm sorry, what? There's 15 different types of orgasms that women can have. Like, what is that?" Because I know for myself, I obviously know of the G-spot orgasm, a clitoral orgasm, and then recently through the podcast I've learned of the cervical orgasm, and even learning about that, I don't even know that that's something I'll ever be able to achieve because that one sounds like a lot of work to try to stimulate and get to. But I'm curious to hear about the other kinds past those three major ones that probably most men and women know of.
Yeah. And before we dive into those 15 different types, it really starts at starting to dissect and reiterate what orgasm actually means to us. And we're so conditioned to believe orgasm is this one thing, this one peak moment of just absolute bliss and like ecstatic pleasure and
Mhm.
sensation. And orgasm, from a tantric perspective, is any peak moment of pleasure. And that can be anywhere on your body. That can be the nipples, that could be other erogenous zones, for example. And when we take the pressure off that performance of having to achieve the orgasm, that's actually when we start to experience more of our pleasure potential. We actually open up our nervous system to the possibility of different kinds of pleasure. And this is ultimately what really draws in this fulfillment, this true joy within our sexuality. So, a big part of this before we dive in is being able to pull in and say, hey, what does orgasm actually mean to me? Have I
Mhm.
just been experiencing clitoral orgasms my whole life? Do I even know if I've experienced an orgasm before? Right. So,
Mhm.
we have these ideas of what an orgasm should be and what it looks like and what it feels like. And while those are still valid, there's a whole nother world of possibility, especially when we're tuning into those 15 plus different types. So there's definitely more of the tangible types of orgasms, which we'll go over. And then there's more like energy based orgasms too. So we can kind of separate the different types where you can be experiencing several different orgasms at a time that are all different and unique to your body specifically. And as we kind of move through these, I also really want to reiterate that what we can't talk about orgasmic potential without talking about our emotions and where we're at emotionally, because they are interconnected things. We can have an orgasm and you know still feel not that great about ourselves afterwards. It's
Mhm.
not like you're in a great headspace every time you go into, self pleasure or having sex with a partner. I mean, the interconnectedness between your thoughts, your emotions, and the different types of orgasms that you're experiencing are super, super connected. So, like in the beginning, when you were talking about this healing process, that's what you're describing, Sarah, is like you have moved through a
Mhm.
huge pivotal moment after moment of your healing process to literally open yourself to experience more pleasure and more fulfillment in your life. And that doesn't always mean that it's sexual, but obviously today we want to talk about the sexual parts too, because that's lots of fun.
Totally. Yeah. And it's crazy how you say that, because I do still think, like, when you say, okay, the emotional side of it, I feel like that's more of, women almost look at that as like that's like the part of it that's a burden. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I think maybe because we are more of the emotional beings and creatures, where it's like, okay, you could have an intimate moment with somebody and maybe it brings up these emotions, but it's like in the moment, if you were to express that with, say, your partner, I mean, you would feel like you're ruining the moment. It's like, oh, they've had an orgasm and now she wants to talk about feelings, right? Where it's like there's that disconnect of like, you can't bring in your emotions and your feelings into something like that, which is funny because at the same time, most people will tell you if you have an emotional connection with somebody, usually sex is way better. But to actually be able to speak about those emotions is where I think women always feel like they have to like hold back or they can't express them, because then that just seems weird or, you know, uncomfortable. Like not all men know how to have those emotional conversations when it comes to sex. So it's like, to feel something afterwards, I feel like most women probably keep it to themselves and they don't share that. And then sometimes those emotions are heavy. Sometimes they're, uncomfortable and probably need to be talked about to feel validated in them. But that's a hard thing to do.
Absolutely. There's so many good parts there of what you mentioned that we can elaborate on. I mean, the first thing that comes up is effective communication. First
Mhm.
of all, we can't have the best sex of our lives and have all of these amazing orgasmic experiences without being able to communicate what we're actually feeling, needing, desiring,
Mhm.
requesting, right? So effective communication by far, even in my personal life with my now partner of 5 years or so, the best sex that we've ever had is the most connective sex, but that is also because we have really great communication. And it
Mhm.
was not always like that. And speaking from a woman's perspective, I used to be on this emotional roller coaster all the time. Okay. And a lot of women are. And we kind of almost deem that as a natural quality of the evolution of a woman or something weird like
Mhm.
that. And being on the emotional roller coaster, whether you're a man or a woman or whatever gender, is not, I would not deem that as natural and normal. It's because we don't actually know what our emotions mean. And we are allowing our emotions to be in the driver's seat. And when we are allowing our emotional state to be the driver, we make choices based off that,
Mhm.
based off who we think that we are in that moment, because we're sad, we're scared, we're anxious, all of the things. We're angry, we're upset. So we make choices based off that really impact our sexuality and the amount of pleasure and fulfillment that we're experiencing. So they're one and the same. We can't have a really fulfilling sexual experience without actually understanding our internal workings and what our emotions are trying to tell us. So, a huge part of my work that you've also been able to witness, Sarah, is being able to go in and say, yeah, this emotional pattern has been something I've been experiencing for over like decades or however long, and I
Mhm.
can't seem to break out of it. So it has less to do with who your partner is, how much money you have, the best lube, the best vibrator, and more to do with like, am I actually connecting to myself on this level of vibration that I haven't been able to touch on before because I'm letting my emotions get in the way. So, as we like move into this conversation about orgasms, like keeping that in mind that each orgasm has its own flavor and also has its own qualities and healing properties as well. So, we can't look at this of like, okay, I'm going to listen to this podcast. I'm going to go have all these different orgasms. Like that might be your reality, but it's
Mhm.
probably not. So, don't get your hopes up if you're not able to have, you're not able to squirt or have a G-spot orgasm after listening to this. But, it's because there's, our emotions also and memories are stored in our sexual center as well. So to keep that in mind,
Okay.
there's that interconnection happening within the physical body and the energy body too. It's not something that's separate from ourselves, so we also need to stop treating our sexuality and our pleasure as something that is separate, because it's always present. It's just that
Mhm.
we really allow these filters to get in the way of how we're perceiving ourselves. And I think that a lot of women they'll wait for permission, for example, to experience pleasure. So they
Right.
won't pleasure themselves, but when their husband comes home from work and wants sex, okay, they're all in. So there's also this self exploration that is absolutely key and necessary to experiencing your orgasmic capacity.
Mhm.
And I mean, I worked with the tools and practices through authentic tantra and sexology and all of those things that I'm trained in for years before I started to incorporate this into my sex life with my partner. So, it's a process that requires commitment and
Mhm.
commitment to your evolution as a human, and saying, hey, like, I'm worthy of pleasure right here, right now. I don't need to get to a certain point in my healing process to then work on myself or to then experience pleasure. So, yeah, keeping that in mind is really, really important.
It's crazy how many layers and how like deep you really can go. And I don't want to say down the rabbit hole because it's to me, it's really not a rabbit hole. It's literally just like inward almost, right? Like how deep you can really just unravel the layers to learn that, to figure that out for yourself, and then to be able to incorporate it into like your life in such a positive way that it really does then, I think, like you said before, kind of like outwardly, once you've figured that out and you kind of are centered in that, it really does outwardly project into like your life in so many ways in such a positive way, right? So I love
Oh,
that.
yeah.
But
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
So out of the 15 kinds, like do they rank as like what, like they're like in a list of like, okay, like the top most like, intense and then kind of go down? Is that kind of how they are? Or is it just really all over the place for the different intensity levels that they could be?
The intensity level depends on every single woman because our bodies are different. We're storing our energy differently. We have different traumas,
Okay.
so as we move through this, I can start to get a little more bit more clearer based off my own experience and the women that I've worked with on these different types of orgasms and maybe what comes up through those spaces. I will say the most common orgasm that we experience as women is the clitoral orgasm. That's pretty obvious. And one thing about clitoral orgasms is, they're short, they're intense, and they're usually accompanied by like a refractory period where it's
Mhm.
like, okay, I can't even touch that area because it's so sensitive. And I would deem clitoral orgasms as being the most surface level orgasm. I mean, obviously, because there's no penetration involved, but
Mhm.
also because they are short, they're intense. And this is kind of the type of orgasm that most women revert to just because it's easy, it's the most familiar, and there's nothing wrong
Yeah.
with that. Clitoral orgasms are amazing. But, if you're just grabbing your vibrator for 3 minutes, then and having a clitoral orgasm, you are not able to even experience the full engorgement process, right? And engorgement
Mhm.
meaning your erectile tissue, because women have erectile tissue too, is not fully engorged with blood. And when we have lots of beautiful energy and blood and breath, and yeah, like your breath moving into those
Mhm.
areas, then you're experiencing more pleasure, and therefore you'll probably have more than, just a clitoral orgasm. So I would say that is definitely the most common.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that, some women might not experience clitoral orgasm. Some women might have numb clits, for
Mhm.
other reasons. So there's different ways that we can experience this, but just based off what is the most familiar, it would be that they're short, intense, and accompanied by that refractory period.
Okay.
Now, the second type of orgasm that I'll usually guide women into starting to explore is the G spot. And I have heard women say to me, when I have tried to have a G spot orgasm, I end up feeling numb afterwards, or there's some pain involved, or I can't find the spot and I don't feel anything. And there's different reasons for that. That is because, according to authentic Tantra methods, or I believe in some Taoist, I'll have to go back and look, but some Taoist practices will say that the G spot stores a lot of unresolved trauma and unresolved emotions. Okay. So
Okay.
one of the reasons, if you can't find it or you can't feel it or you're experiencing pain after you have a G spot orgasm, it could be for several reasons, but one of those being there could be some unresolved stuff that is stuck and stagnant in that area of your body. And that was for me as well. When I started to explore my G spot more on a regular basis, I didn't really feel anything. And then, maybe during the same self pleasure, I would start to experience some sensation and then move through a block. So I would start crying and then
Okay.
experience a really amazing release and orgasmic experience off of that. So this is healing as well. When you have the embodiment happening, as well as you're tapping into your energy as this is occurring and understanding what's coming up, then you're able to maybe work through some of those blocks during your self pleasure experience.
So what about not in a self pleasure capacity then? So I'm just thinking because like for myself, G spot orgasms wasn't something I had my whole life. It was I'd say maybe like I'm working on probably going on 3 years. So I mean, sex is like you say, it's an energy exchange. So if say a woman is having G spot orgasms with a partner, do you think
Mm-hmm.
then that there is more emotion tied to that release and those orgasms with the partner you're having? Not necessarily that it's about them, but like creating different types of attachment in a different way because of the type of release that it actually does give compared to say just having sex and yet feels great, but if you're not having those type of orgasms with a partner, you're not having that same type of maybe emotional, I don't want to say emotional connection. I don't know if like it makes sense of how I'm trying to like explain that.
I think that there's often this like perception, especially in the spirituality realm, that you pick up energy from your sexual partners, and it can result in different emotional ties and
Yeah.
attachment styles and stuff that's not yours. And what I really want to speak on about that is no one can imprint their energy onto you unless you allow it or unless you are unconscious of it. So,
Okay.
the reason why, when I'm giving these examples and I'm talking about it from a perspective of self pleasure, which I can also talk about, during, sex with a partner as well, we can
Mhm.
also talk about that. But one of the big reasons I'm doing that from the self pleasure perspective is because we have to have an understanding of our own bodies, our own energy, our own emotional state before engaging with sex with people we don't really know. That's just a fact. And I'm not
Yep.
saying that one night stands are a bad thing. You can make love to someone in a one night stand. That's absolutely
Yep.
possible and have a wonderful emotional connection. But if you are not discerning of that energy, even within yourself, how are you going to discern with partners and people you're choosing to sleep with? And that's what
Right.
actually results in reiterating and re-implementing those same patterns and beliefs and all of that icky stuff that you don't want to experience. So I think it has less to do with the person you're sleeping with and more to do with a lack of discernment or awareness on the choices that you're actually making that end up implementing the very beliefs on how you feel about yourself. So,
Okay.
there's that deeper, I know this is real deep,
Yeah.
but there's this deeper level, right? That, For example, if you're someone that doesn't trust yourself or doesn't trust your body because you've been manipulated in the past, then you might use
Mhm.
sex as a means to cope with your own emotions, right? And that prevents ultimate connection. That prevents the healing process from happening. And you will keep doing that unless you're resolving that
Mhm.
unresolved tension, that unresolved blockages within your body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. Don't get me wrong, I like that because I think, like, being a spiritual person and stuff and, like, all of those things, I like that you say that, like, nobody can imprint their energy unless, like, you're allowing it. So, I do like that because I've almost kind of, like, felt that or believed that, but then, like, when you hear other things, you're kinda like, "Oh, well, maybe there is some that I take from them." But I like that you say that, like, you can't take that if you're not wanting it. They're not giving that to you if, like, you have that, that awareness of, like, no, I'm not taking on your shit, and, like, just, to kind of your self-protection kind of thing. So I do like that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and that like discernment piece is so key. I know that we were
Mhm.
talking about this a few days ago, Sarah, is like your sexual center is the birthplace of your discernment because you can think of your sexual center as like being the fire element because that's the way that I
Mhm.
teach it. And fire attracts all of these wonderful, beautiful things into your life. It's magnetic, right? But if you don't have the discernment to piece through
Mhm.
those different choices and the people and the options that you have, then you're allowing everything into your energy field.
Right.
So, that's also how things can get a little bit murky and it's difficult for us to actually make the right decisions for ourselves, especially in relationship to who we're having sex with.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's go back to the G spot really quick here because I
Okay.
didn't get a chance to finish that. So the G spot is 1 to 2 inches inside of the vagina. Okay. It's on the anterior side, which is belly button side of the vagina. And it has a distinct texture. Okay. So it feels just like the roof of your mouth. That's the texture of the G spot, roughly. And again, like this area can carry a lot of emotions and you can experience numbness in this area or irritation when the G spot is initially stimulated. So, that
Mhm.
being said, if you've tried to explore your G spot before and you know there has been stuff that, just really wasn't working for you, that doesn't mean that you're broken. That doesn't mean you don't have a G spot. It just means that one, you're not fully engorged, maybe you didn't give yourself enough time before penetration, maybe you just were not exploring the right area, maybe there's some blockages getting in the way. So there's several different reasons. And my favorite way to explore the G spot during sex with my partner is, and the best way to do this is to be, if you're on all fours or you're laying flat on the bed and your partner's coming over you and thrusting downward. That is the
Okay.
best way to stimulate the G spot when your partner is able to thrust downward as they're kind of hovering over you versus like parallel to you. And that is the best way. But again, like you have to be engorged enough. A really wonderful way to stimulate the G spot before penetrative sex is with your finger. The G
Mhm.
spot really loves press and release, press and release. So if you're using just your middle finger or two fingers, like that is one of the best ways to engorge and bring blood flow into the region of the G spot. And perhaps you'll start experiencing more stimulation from there. And one big reason why I usually say that vibrators or G spot vibrators are a scam is
Mhm.
because your G spot does not engorge with friction. So that's another reason why it can be painful. The G spot
Ah.
engorges with pressure. The G spot loves pressure initially. And then
Mhm.
once it's engorged, you can go in and build the momentum and stimulation through friction, whether the vibrator or your partner or just continuing to use your fingers or
Mhm.
whatever. So that's a really important one because a lot of women will go in and just start rubbing around that area and it's like it's painful. It's irritating because you're not engorged. You have to allow that area to engorge and then continue that process to start
Mhm.
experiencing those G spot orgasms. And then one more tip I want to give here without taking up too much time on the G spot is you can, my favorite way is to keep stimulating the clitoris, whether with another hand or your partner's hand or a vibrator, while
Mhm.
you're starting to give pressure to that G spot region with your other hand. Okay. So that's a really great way to start to transfer some pleasure and sensation into that area as well.
Okay. I like that. It's funny because I did get that now, like after this like whole conversation, I'm probably gonna go upstairs and like try it. But I got that G spot stimulator, that crystal wand that you had shared with me, but I've never have actually used it ever on my own. So it's now that you've said that though about the pressure release kind of like portion of it, I'm curious to try it and to see, because same thing, I don't think I've ever actually been able to reach or access like my G spot with my own fingers. Obviously maybe not like trying the right way, but I can through like penetration. So I'm going to try that out and I will let you know, and I will let everybody know how changing those little differences, what the difference it made for myself and being able to achieve that. So I'm curious now.
Yeah, and that crystal wand, which we can put the link to it maybe
Mhm.
in the show notes, but the
Absolutely.
crystal wand is amazing because it's the right angle and the right
Mhm.
shape to kind of mimic how your fingers would kind of curl up and in during that pressure and release.
Okay.
So you can use it. And one of my mentors, Davy Ward Erickson, usually says that this tool is, she calls it the G spot crowbar.
Okay.
But anyways, it's because it's shaped in this like S kind
Yeah.
of curve, and you can grab one end of it and do that same type of stimulation that you would with your fingers. So you can try it like that and let me know how it goes. But this is one thing that I start to incorporate into like when I'm teaching women how to do yoni massage, which is a little bit
Yeah.
more involved, and then we'll start adding in like those different tools and stuff. But I'm really happy that you brought that up, because that's actually one of the best tools that I can recommend to start stimulating that area.
Yeah. No, I'll definitely let you guys all know how it works. So, for sure.
And the G spot is connected to squirting. Okay, so squirting is a real
Mhm.
thing. And they're finding that that G spot stimulation can often result in squirting as well. And squirting is not, just briefly, squirting is not pee. It's actually a completely different ejaculate. So yonis,
Mhm.
vaginas, they can ejaculate, which is really cool. So, squirting is this fluid emitted actually through the urethra, but it's not pee, it's not urine. And stimulating that G spot can, with the right amount of pressure and all of that, can end up resulting in that squirting sensation as well.
Yeah, I have that problem. And it's, I mean, in the beginning, it's like super cool. You're kind of like, oh, yay, I've been able to do this and stuff. But then, like, I'm not going to lie, like, after a while, you're like, oh, yay, another big mess to clean up. So, as fun as it is and as exciting as it is when, like, you can finally do it. And I know, like, 99% of guys, like, love it. It is definitely sometimes one of those things where I'm like, no, please don't. But it's like, obviously the pressure buildup, that's just it. It's like it feels like a pressure is building up, and it's like if you don't release it, it almost does become uncomfortable for like myself, and it feels like there's this itch that like has to desperately be scratched, or so I guess it's like no different than a guy getting whatever, I know they want to call it blue balls, right? Like the buildup, that edging portion, and that is literally what it feels like. It's just like this amount of pressure inside, and it's like super uncomfortable if you don't get to release it. It feels like something is just stuck. So, as much as it can be messy depending on like how much a person does, it really is a real thing. Like I know sometimes like people will be like, oh yeah, you can make it. But I'm like, no, there's times where it's like it's so uncomfortable because you can feel the pressure is there, and it's like it has to come out. It has to go somewhere. So yeah.
Yeah, a lot of women have said that it does feel like the sensation, like you're going to pee yourself. And so that pressure buildup, yeah, exactly. That is how it
Yeah.
feels like. And I think that there's this sense of like letting go and release during that
Mhm.
sensation too, because otherwise, like when you're holding on to that, it can be really uncomfortable, or it can feel like you're going to pee yourself. But it
Yeah.
is a different type. It is coming through your urethra, but it's a different type of ejaculate. It's not pee. So if ladies, if you've experienced that type of sensation, I invite you to like let it build up and allow yourself to see if you can release a little bit and see if you can squirt or have a G-spot orgasm. And, if you've never been able to squirt, like that's not, you're not broken either. Like,
Mhm.
I'm a sexologist and I've never squirted. I've gotten close,
Yeah.
but, I'm just here to say like nobody is perfect. Just because I know my shit and know how to do all of this stuff doesn't mean that I experience all of these different types of orgasms all the time. Our bodies are built differently. Some women have had different procedures. We, given birth. All of these things can
Yeah.
play a huge impact on how much sensation we're experiencing.
No, for sure.
Should we talk about the next orgasm?
Absolutely. I'm curious as to what it is. I knew the other 2, so I'm kinda curious as to, like, where this is gonna go now.
Okay, so we have erectile tissue all inside and outside the vulva, the vagina, all of that. And another orgasm that we can experience is called the U spot. And the U spot is stimulating the urethral opening, okay, where there's actual erectile tissue, where the periurethral sponge is present. That's a type of erectile tissue. And because it's erectile tissue, it can become engorged, just like all of the other erectile tissue, and you can
Mhm.
experience orgasmic sensations there. So, U spot is, again, it's connected to the periurethral sponge. And oftentimes it can, some other types of like vaginal or urethral emissions can occur when you're stimulating that area. So I meant to say urethral emissions, not vaginal, because those are different, which we'll talk about in a second. But the emissions that can happen is like this whitish, thick liquid that actually comes through the periurethral sponge when you're stimulating that area. So again, the urethra is it's it's under the clitoris, right? And it's
Mhm.
before the entrance to the vagina. So you can look this up online if you're not sure where your parts are. And you can also explore like in a mirror, like see your urethra, see your clitoris, see the opening to your vagina, and get really familiar with it. So urethral orgasms are definitely possible as well. Yeah, so that's
So,
always one that's strange for some people.
would somebody know that, like, is it there a different feeling of a release to that type where somebody would be like, "Okay, that was an orgasm that, like, didn't mimic or feel like a G-spot orgasm"? Because I mean, like, it sounds like to me like they're kind of in close proximity to each other. So, if you weren't really aware of the difference, is there a different type of feeling other than, say, just the color of, like, what comes out that somebody would be like, "Oh, okay, that's what that was."
Yeah, for me, the urethral area is super, super sensitive, and I don't often like a lot of pressure or friction in that area.
Mhm.
So I don't normally explore it too much. But I have found the U spot to be even more sensitive than my clitoris.
Okay.
So it's almost too much for me to like have direct stimulation there. I can have indirect stimulation like above or below, and that feels really good to me, or to the
Okay.
sides even. So, that feels really nice to me, like to the sides, kind of stroking the internal clitoral legs, which,
Okay.
okay, so now I mentioned something else. But so the clitoris actually extends into the body. So you have clitoral legs and clitoral bulbs that are erectile tissue that extend into the body. So it's not visible from the surface, but it can become engorged as well. So, that area is really pleasurable for me as well. It's a little hard for me to explain exactly where the locations are of that without having like a model in front of me, my little silicone model to show you exactly where that
Right.
is. But the clitoral legs feel really nice to me, and those are in closer proximity to the U spot. And that's where you're stroking in between the the outer and inner labia. So you have outer
Okay.
labia and inner labia, and stroking in between those feels really pleasurable for me. So, anyways, yes, you can have these U spot orgasms from that stimulation of the urethral opening too. It just depends on everybody. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so it really it's dependent on every person. It's so sensitive for me that I usually don't even stimulate that area for long periods of
Mhm.
time. But for other women, it might feel really amazing. It might feel better than your clitoris. It might, you might want to blend it in with G-spot orgasm. So there's all different ways to stimulate that area.
Okay. Interesting. I'm gonna have to Google that one a little bit more.
You don't got to Google it, girlfriend. You got me.
That's true. I do have access to you for that. So yeah, we'll have a lesson on that one a little later too. Like, but
Yeah, a lot of times when you Google this stuff too, you're going to get different information that's maybe not updated, not giving you the whole picture. So, you know, and if we could experience all these different types of orgasms just based off a YouTube video, then I would be out of a job, right? So,
that's true. Well, then I feel like people would really never leave their houses if they're like, I got 15 different types of orgasms. I'm going to go through today, just checking them all off one by one. Did this one first. Out calling in sick today for this. We're going to work on this one. But yeah,
yeah, right.
at least I
Because
know
it's
I
like
would
that
be.
emotional process. Yeah, yeah. It's a process
Totally.
for sure.
Yeah.
So, another one that I really want to mention is cervical orgasm. The cervix is really amazing. Okay. It's like when you become super aroused during the beginning stages of your sexual experience and you're getting really, really aroused, what happens is the entire uterus and cervix like almost pulls up and in. So it actually creates more length of your vaginal canal. And when you're really engorged, this is going to automatically mean that you're going to have way more comfort during sexual penetration. So whether it's
Mhm.
with a penis, with a toy, with your fingers, whatever. And cervical orgasm is one of these orgasms that you really have to give yourself time and build up before you're starting to stimulate that area because the cervix is like all the way back into the back of the vagina. So, this can be a really painful area if you're penetrating way too fast and way too soon. Cervical orgasm is directly connected to the energy body. So, in Tibetan Tantric Buddhism, we have this line of communication called the central channel, and it actually ends at the base of the cervix. Okay, so energetically speaking, the base of your cervix is the one of the core entrances into your energy body. So it can be really, really intense. When I've had cervical orgasms, it's almost always a very heart opening experience. And it feels very, very different. It feels like a deep rumble through my entire body. And I
Oh,
often
wow.
feel my heart activated. I often feel my throat relax. I
Mhm.
often feel these sensations all the way up into my uterus, into my womb, that are pulsating with this beautiful orgasmic experience. So they can be very, very intense. And I often have had emotional releases after having cervical orgasms as well. And one of the ways you know if you're having an emotional release is not just if you're crying after an amazing orgasm, which is totally
Mhm.
normal, natural, and absolutely fucking beautiful, but if you're having like these twitches. So they're like these little energy twitches after having a really intense orgasm where maybe for me it's like my heart center is kind of like pulsing and I'm twitching like
Mhm.
not on purpose, and that can last for several minutes afterwards. So these orgasms, they differ in the length of time you're experiencing, the amount of intensity you're experiencing, and they're not going to be the same every single time,
Right.
it really depends on your emotional state, how open you are, how in tune you are with your body, all of these things. But I've had cervical orgasms that have lasted for 1 minute, 2 minutes, maybe longer. So, it can be a really intense experience that, maybe needs some time for you to build up to.
Right.
Again, nothing is wrong with you if you can't have cervical orgasms or if you have a lot of cervical or vaginal pain. This is a whole nother topic on pelvic pain and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But again, that's, yeah, a really big area of the body that can create a lot of life force energy and awareness in your body when you're experiencing.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like a very, very beautiful type of orgasm. I think I remember briefly having a conversation about it in a different interview about that type. And same thing, like it is a little harder to reach, obviously, partner dependent size wise things, those things you might not necessarily always be able to with, penis, whatever inside you kind of thing. But like with different toys, is my
Mhm.
understanding there is certain toys that, would be better equipped to reach those areas, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so you can't usually reach the cervix with just your fingers. I mean,
Yeah.
you need a longer toy, or, if your partner's penis is, above average, then he'll be able to reach the cervix area. And, there's different positions, sexual positions that will reach the cervix better as well. Doggy style can be really deep into that area.
Okay.
Laying on your back with your knees up and towards your chest can be really deep into the cervix area. So there's lots of different ways to penetrate the cervix to have cervical orgasm. But again, like that buildup is really key. One really amazing way that I like to build up to the cervix is by focusing on the A spot and the G spot at the same time. So the A spot is another type of orgasm, and that is 3 to 4 inches inside of the vagina. So it's very close to the cervix, but it's not as deep as the cervix. And it's on
Okay.
that belly side. So belly button side, anterior side of the wall of the vagina. And this is also called the anterior fornix erogenous zone.
Mm-hmm.
And this again is not as deep as the cervix. And what this feels like is a very smooth area right before the cervix, and it feels different than the rest of the vaginal canal. So
Hmm.
it's a very smooth area. Just, I don't know how to relate it to anything. It's just very, very different. It's a different texture than the rest. So you'll know when you're hitting that area. And it's, how do I explain it? It's like that one is also very intense for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it can feel like almost a tickling sensation deeper inside at first. And then as you start to build up more stimulation there, it can become more and more pleasurable. So I would
Okay.
say for me, the A spot, it can feel similar to a cervical orgasm because they're in close proximity to one another, but it's not as deep. Okay. And
Okay.
one way that is really nice to stimulate the A spot is by, like, if you have a toy that's curved, like the wand is absolutely
Mm-hmm.
amazing for this. So say you have just stimulated the G spot area, and then you move that wand up and back into the A spot, and you stimulate that for a few moments, and then you move back to the G spot, and then move back up to the A spot. So that's a really nice way to start to transfer the pleasure from the G spot to the A spot into those deeper areas.
Okay. I'm gonna
And
have a whole
then,
afternoon
yeah,
planned
I
and
know.
booked of like finding these spots. You're gonna be on like call on the thing. I'm gonna be sending you messages. Okay, this is the way to look like this. This is what I found. This feels like this. Am I doing it right? Like it's almost like you need a coach in the room with you, like walking you through this. And I say that because obviously, like a guy is not going to be somebody who is like walking you through this. Like you're not going to be sitting there with like your partner. I mean, maybe at some point, but like starting out, you're not going to be, because if anything, they're going to be looking at you kind of funny and you're going to be like, hey, now you're distracting me. But honestly, like I would sit there with like a girlfriend or like a coach and be like, just show me, do it to me, show me, let me know if I'm doing it right. I'll tell you what I feel. You move it to where it's supposed to go. But yeah, I mean, that opens up the door to a whole lot of other stuff. But like that's what I think of in my mind. I'm like, oh, I want to try this, but like I need a coach in the room to tell me and teach me how to do this. So,
I mean, yeah. So it's kind of a taboo topic to talk about. Yeah, like what you're saying, I wish there was a coach in the bedroom with me, like,
mm-hmm.
coaching me through these different orgasmic types. And, as a sexologist and tantra healer, that there are opportunities for, women to come in and receive or to be guided through these types of experiences. And that doesn't mean that it's sexual and promiscuous. It's a healing experience. And that's kind of the container that I'm able to hold even when I'm giving a yoni massage or guiding a couple through yoni or lingam massage. So I do that a lot of the times where, guiding
Ah.
experience, after they've had the educational portion, it's like, okay, maybe we've tried these things and it's like we're still coming up against some blocks and we want a little bit more
Mhm.
guidance. Then it's like, okay, I can step into that container. But by no means does that mean like, hey, I have someone I've never met reach out to me and they're like, I want you to give me a yoni massage. That's not something that I offer for
Right.
that reason. There has to be there has to be this self sovereignty coming into the picture where someone has some understanding about their emotional state and their energy body and can also be engaged in that process versus me just giving an experience, because this is where shit gets murky in the realm of tantra, because there's so many practitioners out there that are doing that just go and give linga massages without those clients having any background information on what tantra even is or what they're even
Right.
going to experience. So the intentions and moving into those sessions is really really important to hold that container of healing and enrichment and evolution as a human being instead of it turning into this sexualized thing. So anyways, that was just to
Okay.
kind of answer your last comment.
Yeah, that's good to know actually. Because like, I know for myself, I think like too like a lot of it is like I guess your thoughts and your beliefs around that stuff. Because I know for myself, it would be an educational thing for the purpose of learning something. Whereas some people, I think, have a hard time separating the sexual side of any of those things. But for me, it's just like, no, this is educational. Teach me so that I can go home and I can like put this into practice, whether with myself for self pleasure or with my partner. And this is something we're learning together. No different than going to any other classes. Why can't sexual activity, self pleasure, pleasure itself, why can't there be an education portion to it that I know this is going to sound weird, that is hands on in the sense where it gives people actually practical tools they can use instead of just try this, Google this, YouTube this, because sometimes you do need that third person navigating, helping, communicating for people. I think when partners are trying something together and maybe communication isn't your strong suit, there's a lot of frustration that comes in. There's a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. Okay, he's not doing it right. I don't feel this, but I don't want to tell him that. He feels bad. Let's try this. No, do that. And then both people get frustrated and they walk away from stuff like that versus having somebody that can help mediate and help them both like achieve the same goal together. So that's why for me, I do feel like that would be something 100% I'd be like, all for this. Teach me, teach him, teach us so we can do this together. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And like that support, I think, should be readily available.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, without it having to mean something. So, for example, if I'm guiding a couple through, exploring the G spot, I'm not involved in that relationship dynamic in
Mm-hmm.
any way. I'm not involved, on a promiscuous level. I'm not involved on a kinky level, like none of that. I'm holding that container for their healing, their evolution, and their enrichment as a couple. And that, again, that doesn't mean that they're not experiencing pleasure and orgasms and all of the fun things, but I'm like holding that container of like, okay, I'm guiding this based off my experiences,
Mm-hmm.
based off my knowledge and all of those things, so that you can go home, like you're saying, and experience and continue to evolve based off what you've learned. That is
Right.
so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So that's amazing that it is a service that for anybody who didn't know, because I didn't, I would have thought the exact same thing. It's super taboo. People would judge that, like you can't do that. But knowing that that is out there for people, definitely, I think that's amazing. So,
Yeah. And that the intentions moving into it is for connection
hmm.
and just fostering that sense of connection with one another, or even if it's just one person with yourself, like that is the ultimate intention on moving into anything sexually related. And if
Mhm.
we don't have the correct motivation behind it, that's where things get skewed. And that's
Yeah.
where things occur that weren't meant to happen, and all of that that we often hear about, unfortunately, in different fields. So really, really important to also, like, if you're looking into this type of work, to know who you're working with, what their credentials are, not to be afraid to ask, the types of people that they've been working with. All of that is so freaking necessary, because
Yeah.
there is an energetics to this work, right? So if you're stepping into a container like this with someone that you barely know, that doesn't have the right credentials, who's learned yoni massage in a 2-day weekend workshop, like,
Mhm.
that does not sit right with me. And I don't think that should be normalized, but unfortunately it's a thing. So,
Yeah.
like, look into, research the people that you're wanting to work with in this type of level, because it's no small thing.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
really
that's good
powerful
to know.
work.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not gonna lie, I'm surprised. Like a lot of these orgasms we've been talking about have all been like internal. I kind of was expecting that like they were mostly going to be these external things that like I didn't really realize, which I'm sure there's some coming up, but I'm just surprised at how many there are that are internal that we're so unaware of, that nobody's ever taught this stuff. Like that's it. Like you know of your clit, you know of the infamous G spot that not everybody can achieve, and most people probably never feel it in their lifetime. That's the stuff that they tell you. But then to find out that there's 3 or 4 other spots internally that you can have these different types of orgasms, it's kind of fascinating when you really think about it.
Hmm.
Fascinating in the sense of like knowing that you can explore yourself, but also kind of like interesting in the way that this, not that this information is hidden, it obviously isn't in certain cultures, but it's definitely not something that's outwardly spoken about in Western North America or just North America in general. This isn't something you learn in school. This isn't something they're teaching you. So yeah, that's what I find. I think the more interesting part of it is like, oh, there's all these things, but they don't want you to know it. They're not telling you this, but that's just, I could go down a rabbit hole on that, so maybe we won't. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, a big part of that is because like, women's anatomy hasn't been truly studied up until
Mhm.
recently. Like,
Okay.
it wasn't until, like, I think the 90s, until the clitoral complex was actually mapped out. Like, that's insanity. Till the 90s, really,
Oh,
where it's just actually mapped out for someone to, like, look
yeah.
up so you can, like, see a diagram of it. That's insane to me,
Yeah.
I don't think that's acceptable. So I think a big part of it is that it's just it's never been widely known information up until
Mhm.
recently, and we're still finding information about, and science is figuring these things out. But again, like, even science, you can read stuff about these different spots, and some science will try to debunk it, and some science will say it's not this and it's that. And I think that to look back into the ancient wisdom too is really pivotal here, of, like, we've been doing this shit for thousands of years. We have been healing and evolving as human beings through our sexuality
Uh,
beyond just a primal level of having to reproduce for thousands of years. People have become
mhm.
enlightened, conscious masters of this shit, So, but it's for us to sit here and talk about it and allow it to be this widely known information, and to say, yes, you can experience all of these orgasms and you can evolve as a human being and heal on a level that you've never experienced before by
Mhm.
doing so. That is the
Yeah,
best motivation for healing that I've ever heard,
totally.
because all the stuff that we see out there right now is like shadow work and polarity and having to move through all this dark stuff. And I'm not saying that you don't come across dark shit during this practice, but if it ends in an orgasm, hey, I'm more willing to do it. I'm more willing to go there. And guess what? In the process, I am alleviating the the generations,
Mhm.
the thousands of years of not just repression of women and our orgasmic capacity, but the memories stored of our past lives. Like, this is all connected
Yeah.
to our sexuality. It's encoded within us. So for us to
Mhm.
not explore it, and not to engage with it head on, and not to truly embody it is rejecting a part of our human evolution. It is
Yeah.
rejecting a part of ourselves. And I believe that when we're moving on this path of healing, right? If we're rejecting any parts of ourselves, there's always going to be that gap. There's always going to be that lack of fulfillment and the feelings of stuckness and like not knowing where to go next. And for me, tuning into my sexuality on like this sexual level as well as this
Mhm.
non-sexual level in terms of my pleasure evolution has shifted and changed every facet of my life.
Right.
Everything. Everything. I've been able to move through ancestral and generational blocks by having orgasms on
Yeah.
this level of attunement. I've eliminated lots of the attachment styles I've had that I couldn't break through before with just, traditional therapy and stuff. I've been able to work with my own emotions on a level that I never have before because I used to have PMDD and
Mhm.
insane hormonal, emotional shit,
Yeah.
baggage all month long. Depression, anxiety, feelings of unfulfillment, feelings of unworthiness. I was able to heal those things through my sexuality. So it's like this deep level of ourselves that we need to stop rejecting and treating it like it's
Yeah.
something outside of ourselves. It's like it's right here, right now.
Yeah. No, I love that, and it's so true, right? It is very powerful. Just for the men that are listening, there is obviously set types of orgasms that men have that are different than what we are talking about today. And I know that kind of got mentioned in our first interview. So maybe, another day in the future we can actually dive into that, the male side of the types of orgasms they have, just so you guys don't feel like you're not included and that we don't care about your orgasms as well, because obviously we do. But this is more obviously focused on a woman's body, our anatomy, and the different types of orgasms that we can experience. So I just wanted to
Yeah,
clarify
and
that for the guys listening.
there's a lot of similarities too that
Mhm.
yeah, this is definitely another topic for a whole nother podcast episode because men, you can experience over 10 different types of orgasm, and we can talk about so many other things in tandem with that. But even if you are a man listening to this episode, like there's a direct relationship and
Mhm.
correlation between these orgasms and your own body as well, just on a
Okay.
different type of level too. So even
Okay,
on the
perfect.
emotional side, it's all super
Yeah.
connected, you
Yeah.
know so why don't we move into a couple more orgasms here? You
Sure.
mentioned that you were surprised by not so many external types of
Mhm.
orgasms. A lot of them are internal. And there's actually about eight internal. So we've only mentioned a
Okay.
few so far. So good stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, another really great internal orgasm is called the P spot, which is the posterior fornix erogenous zone. So this is on the opposite side. So remember when I was talking about the A
Mhm.
spot on the anterior side. So this is the opposite. So this is like towards your back, right? So the back side of the vagina. And this is also very deep inside of the vagina, and it's pretty much right across from the A spot, just on the other side.
Okay.
And just because it's right across from one another, you would be surprised by just how different they feel. They feel completely different. So, think about it how when we're stimulating the area on the opposite side, which honestly, I don't think most of us get that type of stimulation, to be honest,
I
unless
know I don't.
unless we flip our toy around on the other side where it's like, for example, if you use that wand or a curved toy, you're like
Mhm.
flipping it around to be towards the back side. And I that's not an area that I think women normally explore. So it's definitely worth exploring. You can experience lots of wonderful, deep, penetrative sensations there. And again, it's on the opposite side, across from the A spot, super close to the cervix. Okay.
Okay.
Another really fun one is anal orgasm. Okay. This can be another big topic, but these orgasms obviously are from stimulating around the anus or inside the anus. And believe it or not, there is an extremely high amount of nerve endings within the anus. So Why would there be tons of nerve endings there if we weren't meant to experience pleasure? Right? So, if you've never done anal play, you can just do around the external parts with a finger or a toy or a little vibration. It doesn't have to be anything major or serious. And again, like I recommend not to start doing anal play until you've had at least one or two orgasms where you're super warmed up, you're super like, relaxed, especially in the pelvic area. Really, really important. And then to go really slow because anal penetration is different than vaginal penetration.
Mhm.
You have to go even slower because there's like 3 or 4 rings of the anus that you have to work through until you're actually inside of the anal cavity. Okay. So when you're moving through those rings, you have to move through that one ring and then let it rest. Through another, let it rest. Let yourself open around the toy or finger or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And then eventually building yourself up to have a deeper penetration within the anus. And then you can start playing with friction and movement and all of that. But if you're just starting out, then like a finger is enough, or a very, very
Mhm.
small, tiny toy is enough. And then if you're into it, you build up to bigger toys, penis, whatever, and that can be really, really freaking pleasurable. I've had amazing anal orgasms with my partner, and
Yeah.
that's something that like I never thought that I would even enjoy until one day I was like, no, this, we were playing around a little bit. I'm like, yeah, let's try this,
Yeah.
so definitely it's something that I feel like I have to be in the mood for. It can't be like
Mhm.
this thing that's happening all the time. Like I'm definitely, it only happens maybe once every few months or whatever,
Yeah.
because I really need to be in the mood for it, which is okay. Like that's fine. But I also feel that anal orgasms are so intense. They're
Yeah.
super intense for me. They run through my whole body. It's not just in that area. I feel it through my whole body. And I often do blended orgasms with this, meaning as I'm receiving anal penetration, I'm also massaging my clitoris at the same
Mhm.
time. So I will then have an anal clitoral orgasm or a blended orgasm. So there's lots of different ways that we can start to blend our orgasms as well. If you're really feeling engorged, you could have a toy in the vagina and a toy or a penis in the anus, right? So, like,
Yep.
there's and that's going to be really intense, but I mean, you can build yourself up to exploring these different types. And if you don't like one or you're adverse to one, like that's okay. Like you don't I always say like the best sex you'll ever have of your life is not the most explorative sex. It's not the kinkiest sex. It's not the most spontaneous sex. It's the most connective sex that you will have that will be
Mm.
the best sex of your entire life. So again, if the connection is not there, you're not feeling it, never force yourself to explore these areas, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Keep the connection. The connection is how you're going to experience more pleasure in the long run.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Yeah. But I don't know. That was like, it was at like the top of my list of like something to accomplish for myself this year, this goal, like with anal play and stuff, but like for myself, not like eventually, yes, with a partner, but like I really wanted to like be able to enjoy it with myself. And like, and I did, but like, I think I don't know if I told you that, but it started with I was doing like the tantra self pleasure practice, like the ocean breathing, the 20 minutes of that, and like having that deep level of relaxation within myself. Then it was like I was able to move into that, and it was just this crazy thing of like I've never doing anything to all of a sudden like being able to just so easily do it. I was like, well, okay, this was easier than I thought. It's like in your mind, it's going to be this big, complicated thing because it's going to hurt and it's this. But I could tell the differences on the days where I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this. And I was excited to go right into it because I had experienced then like anal orgasm and I'm just going to go do that. No, you're not just going to go do that. Like, you're not just going to go lay down. And that's not going to be the first thing you're going to do. I was like, okay, no, wait, I need to dial it back. I need a minute here. and like to breathe and to build up other areas and then move into it. And it was like a world of a difference. And I was like, this is nice. But like I still haven't like crossed that bridge with like a guy. And I don't even know that I ever feel like I really need to, because it was something I wanted to do for myself and I've been able to do it. And I enjoy those orgasms all on my own. I don't know that I need to share that with like a guy, maybe at some point, but like for now, I'm just like, no, that's just for me and I'm going to enjoy it. And I remember I had girlfriends when we were younger be like, oh my God, I fucked myself in the ass with this toy. And it's like, we say it almost shamefully, like, I feel like such a dirty girl, blah, blah, blah. And like, it's this thing. Whereas like now as an adult, I'm like, yeah, I had the best anal sex ever with myself and I don't even care and I'm not ashamed and it was wonderful. Look at the toy I used. Here, look at my friends. I took a little video so I can prove that I did it. It's like this thing we're just sharing now. And I'm like, but before it'd be like, oh my God, don't tell anybody I fucked myself in the ass. And it's this whole embarrassing thing. And like now it's just like, yeah, oh yeah, look at the one I use, and we all talk about it like that's the next level masturbation. So like I'm all for it. But yeah, but it's a
Yeah,
process.
it is. And you
Yeah.
mentioned like the nervous system reset. Like if you're not feeling safe in your body, there's no way in hell you're going to experience, a lot of these different orgasms. You have to feel
Mhm.
safe in your body. And, I think that a big reason, like, okay, this is going to be a whole nother can of worms, but just very, very briefly here as we start to finish up is, in the world of like BDSM and kink and stuff, I think that like why like anal play and things like that are so big is not just because someone is being able to be put in a place of vulnerability, but there's an override in the system, right? That is taking place of like, I don't feel safe in my body. So now I'm going to be put in this place or this situation where I have to submit. So like, this is another conversation where we can actually override the natural responses in the body. Like if we're feeling unsafe, to override those responses. So again, like as you're like moving into your sexuality, to just be aware of like where those responses are at and which ones like are actually authentic, because we can't keep overriding those things that we're experiencing. Like you said, like you were not
Mhm.
ready, so you took a step back and you allowed yourself to build up to that point. That is beautiful. That is such a profound awareness. And I think that a lot of us need that awareness instead of just rushing towards the goods, right? And to really truly be present with what is occurring. That presence is truly the medicine of how you're going to
Mhm.
open up into your orgasmic capacity more and more.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. It's so true. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, anal, which is funny because even when I was like thinking of like all the top orgasms, it didn't even cross my mind to think of like anal, but on the list, and I like it.
Yeah. And there's lots of other ones, but like energy orgasm, whole body orgasm, you can have an entire vaginal orgasm, you can have ejaculatory orgasms. So there's so many
Okay.
more that we can discuss. And I don't want to overwhelm, I don't want to overwhelm anyone
No,
with just like
absolutely.
how many we can explore. Nipple and breast orgasm, the blended orgasms are endless. So there's above and beyond 15 different types. But just to reiterate the fact that you can't dive head on into this unless,
Hmm.
right, you're also addressing your emotional state and the patterns that come up and all of that good stuff, because we need to connect back. If there's something blocking us from that connection, there's no way we're going to experience all these different orgasms. So it is a healing process that can occur.
Which is so crazy because I just don't even think people understand like how connected those things are. And I think most people just assume that anybody who maybe struggles with pleasure or orgasms, it has to have been from like some form of sexual trauma, which it isn't always. Like there are so many other forms of trauma and things that can happen to a person that create sexual blocks, that it doesn't have to be a sexual trauma that happened. And I think there's a lack of understanding and awareness around those, and I mean such a lack of conversation around it in general. And I think what I found frustrating is like even like doing the work with you, it was like I could see like the resistance in myself. It's like, I don't want to. I just want it to work. I just want this to like, I want to just be past this. I just want to feel this. Like, why do I have to do all this other internal work in order to feel that? Why can't it just be like, I want to have this type of orgasm and I'm going to have the orgasm, but I don't actually have to work through the shit that is preventing me from being able to do it in the first place, right? So it's crazy how much there is tied to it, but
Yeah, it's not just sexual trauma. And again, like I
yeah.
think that we do get caught up in that belief of like, I didn't experience sexual trauma, so, nothing should be there. And that's totally false because, again, like our sexual center is storing lifetimes of information and
Mhm.
memories and traumas. There's a wealth of information that's there that can result in traumatic imprints and memories
Yeah,
and all of this stuff. So, that's just, yeah, this is a really big conversation to have on
totally.
the topic of just trauma. Like, trauma is not something that just happens to you, it's how you perceive the event
Mm.
itself, it's how you feel about yourself, it's how you perceive yourself after the event has occurred, which it can affect any facet of you and can reside anywhere in your body. So even when I work with like women that have different sexual issues like cysts or fibroids, PMDD, hyperthyroidism, all of these things that seem like they're hormonal related is actually related back to their inability to fully connect to their sexuality and their freedom emotionally within that. So
Yeah,
there's so many connections there that often are tied back into our sexuality that seemingly have nothing to do with sex, and a lot of times it
right.
doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, honestly, Eva, thank you so much for sharing. I mean, I feel like sex in general is just a topic that like people could talk about forever. There's so many layers to it. There's so many fascinating things about it. So again, thank you for coming on here and sharing the different types of orgasms that really are out there that we have access to and that we can learn about with ourselves. So yeah, for everybody listening, I highly recommend, following Ava, checking out her stuff, working with her if you're looking to, explore that with yourself, to discover all things Tantra and what that can look like. Yeah. So thank you. I appreciate your time.
It was such a pleasure. I love being here and having these conversations with you, and I can't wait to continue the topic.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like diving into the male aspect at it some point, because I'm curious too, just, as a person who likes to give pleasure, I'm curious to know, their different stuff. And then, yeah, I feel like the guys would definitely love to learn a little bit about themselves that they probably don't know. Right. So, yeah. So, everybody stay tuned for
Yes.
that because we will definitely touch on those topics in the future.
Yes. Stay tuned.
Yes. All right. Thank you.